Hi and welcome to my new and improved tutorial for dealing with emotional stuff in Quake, though the same general ideas work in all other competitive games. I know you might be tempted to skip parts of this, but I really recommend that you don't. Every bit of this builds on top of the last bit, and if you're missing some of the background and context, chances are you'll walk away from this with an entirely wrong idea. I promise I'll be as quick as I can. I've actually scripted this one in advance, so I hope that will make things flow a little better. So, what's this about? Well, there are a whole bunch of negative emotions that can mess up your playing. You might get overly frustrated, or angry, or salty, maybe even scared, and ultimately you might tilt and not really be focused on playing anymore. If it gets really bad, you might get Quake depression, which is an actual depression, of course, but a state of feeling like there's no point and you'll end up either playing half-heartedly or give up altogether. Not really a point that you want to get to, right? So, to better understand how to, or how not to, deal with these sorts of emotions, let's talk about learning. And by that, I don't mean memorizing information like in school, but a somewhat more general thing. Learning to not touch a hot stove, learning to feel good if someone compliments you, to feel bad if someone insults you, and so on. Here's the really simplified version. Something happens, like you missing a shot, and your mind automatically brings up something. Maybe a hint of frustration, or a thought like, dang, that was kind of important. This is actually already a learned response. Just a fairly tame one. Now, how you react to whatever learned thing comes up has a big impact on what's going to happen next time in a similar situation. If you get very angry about your missed shot, chances are you'll get angry again the next time. To condense it even further, you have a trigger, a situation, or a thought or feeling, actually, which brings up a learned response. Now, the trigger itself doesn't really do anything. Missing a shot doesn't have to feel any particular way. It's your learned responses that make it feel the way it does. But there's more that plays into this. Obviously, learned responses have to come from somewhere, and that's where all of this nice stuff comes in. Your mindset, what you believe, what you want, and so on, and your expectations of yourself and the game and who knows what. And your natural thoughts following from all of that are sort of like learned responses too, only they're less directly attached to the trigger. More importantly though, they also affect how you react to whatever comes up, and that's how they affect that loop between your reaction and what's probably going to happen with a higher likelihood next time. The problem with feedback loops is that they can escalate. Learned responses can go from an initially harmless trigger response pair to a massive explosion of anger, simply because the feedback builds up over time. There's one more thing that affects this equation, the yellow asterisk, but I don't really have time to get into that now. Maybe in the next video. So, if you're getting an inkling that this feedback thing might be a problem, you'd be right. In its compact form, I call it the amplification rule, which means if you feed something, it grows. Keep dumping feedback into that feedback loop I showed, and you'll make the learned response stronger over time. So let's look at the normal advice for dealing with emotions. Self-help stuff on the internet, or just well-meaning friends might tell you to, for example, take some deep breaths. And you know that if you're in the middle of a thing, it doesn't really help, right? So how about positive thinking? Everything's fine. I am great at this and such. Unfortunately, you know if you're lying to yourself, right? And even if you're not, it doesn't quite feel real, does it? Telling yourself that 10 missed shots in a row are no big deal might not feel very convincing in that moment. Of course, there are plenty of other things that we all automatically end up doing to try and deal with those emotions. Let's talk about those. Tell yourself that it's only a game. I dare you. The problem is that you already know that. So how could telling yourself possibly make a difference? Well, it doesn't. You know that already. So let's just move on. More generally, you might try to argue with your feelings, to reason it out. This mistake isn't so bad. This is still useful experience, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, the mind checks these thoughts against what's currently going on in the mind, and it finds all of those fancy emotions and goes, hey, wait a minute. Those thoughts don't actually fit these emotions, and it throws the thoughts away. The mind is big about things being sort of consistent. At other times, that's useful, but in these situations, not so much. So instead, let's indulge ourselves and go to town experiencing the, let's say, anger. Start yelling, punishing the keyboard, that sort of thing, you know? I know it's tempting, and sometimes it feels kind of good, actually, if you really get into a negative emotion, doesn't it? Like when people listen to sad songs when they're feeling sad. Of course, we can already see the amplification rule coming in there. First cycle of feeding, another cycle, even more, and the learned response keeps growing, getting stronger and faster, covering more ground, happening more often. By the way, I spent like 2 minutes on this amazing animation, and I hope you can properly appreciate that. Another thing you can try to do is get rid of the feelings, because hey, no point in getting upset in a game, right? And you might do that by telling yourself in your mind very loudly, these feelings should go away, thank you very much, or whatever else feels like it might help make the feelings disappear. Usually it's something that sort of feels like pushing or shoving or squeezing the feelings in a manner of speaking. So there is usually a sense of mental effort involved. Can you believe I'm bringing up the amplification rule again? Anyway, the insidious thing about it is any food will do for the amplification rule. In this case, the sense of internal struggle. Adding that to your learned response will change it a little. In the future, it will also feel harder to deal with the feeling. Even worse, let's say that you succeed. Eventually, your mind gets the message and stops bringing up the thoughts and emotions. But the problem is, the learned response is still there. It's just buried now. You might just feel a little stressed or tense or something like that, maybe even without fully understanding why at that point. The end result is that the learned response still happens, but now it's harder to relate to anything, which makes it harder to work on too. So, with how often the amplification rule comes up, part of our goal has to be to avoid triggering it, right? To break the loop, to not feed new stuff into the learned response. As we've already seen, all kinds of food work to reinforce the learned response in some way. So what could we possibly feed it that would actually help us? Well, absolutely any food will grow it, so that leaves just one possibility: doing nothing. That means experience the response without getting swept up in it, without pushing it away, without even trying to change it. This is the one thing in this presentation you'll have to just believe me. If you don't have experience with something like awareness meditation, you probably don't have any personal experience that this works. But I promise you that it does. Breaking the loop by doing nothing, if you can manage that in the first place, it's not necessarily easy, makes the response fade, both in the moment, within a minute or two at the most if you do it right, and over time more completely if you keep starving the loop over and over. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's the only option. Basically, anything else will trigger the amplification rule. Any advanced trickery, and I'll be getting back to that later, is basically impossible to do on your own. Sorry to tell you. Now, this is a difficult habit to get into. I think it helps to think about this in the right sort of way. I have to admit that doing nothing isn't easy, as stupid as it sounds. Have you ever tried not scratching an itch? It's really quite challenging. Not trying to change a learned response is like that, very much. And the more the response bothers you, the harder it is to do nothing about it, which again is the only thing that will actually start that loop. To at least help you remember to try and do the right thing, think of it like this. Feelings aren't just random noise. Much like the body uses pain to let you know that something is wrong physiologically, the mind uses positive emotions to tell you things are going well, and negative emotions to tell you things are going less well. And usually this works really well, but the mind isn't perfect, as we all know, and sometimes it will think that things are good when they aren't, or vice versa. Because of the amplification rule, your only way to correct your mind is to starve the loop. For that to happen, you have to actually fully experience the learned response. If you feel angry, actually feel the anger, allow it to happen, and do nothing. Don't distract yourself, don't indulge it, don't try and change it. If you manage this, the response will fade. But more importantly, this is also feedback to your mind that you can handle the emotion, plus whatever brought it up that the mind thinks needs bringing up the emotion. And over time, the mind will reevaluate and realize that the learned response is no longer necessary and sort of delete it. In short, assume that the mind has a positive intention of sorts. And when it seems to be wrong about something, prove it to it by being able to deal with everything that comes up by starving the loop. As I said, this is not easy. Here are some practical thoughts. If you're not paying attention to what's happening in your mind, well, you probably won't remember to try and starve that loop. So your awareness needs to include at least some of what's happening inside your head. One way to make it easier to stay there mentally is to talk yourself through it out loud, so it's harder to forget to keep talking. I know it happens a lot if you don't do it for real. For example, tell yourself, I'm going for the next item now. I missed a shot, that's annoying, but I can feel that annoyance and be okay. No need to do anything about it. Now the annoyance is fading a bit, making my next move here in the game, and so on. Obviously, this makes it much harder to play at your best at the same time. So you'll probably want to spend a decent amount of time playing without expecting to play on your normal level, because you'll be practicing this stuff. And that kind of takes precedence. Since this is a mental skill of its own that takes time to develop, please don't be too hard on yourself. You're not going to be able to do this perfectly straight away, or even at all initially. And once you're decent with it, you still won't nail it every time. That's unavoidable. Just please allow yourself to be a little human here. We all are. Anyway, suppose all you're getting is vague responses, like I talked about earlier, like feeling tense or stressed while playing. That means that you actually succeeded in the past in pushing out certain thoughts and feelings. So how do you deal with that? Well, exactly the same way. Just fully experience those vague responses. Don't try to change them, accept their present, and remember that there's some sort of positive intention behind them, even if you have absolutely no idea what the responses are even about. If you keep that up for a bit, you may find the thoughts and feelings coming back. This is actually a good sign, even if it feels worse that way because of the new negative emotions. It means you've brought the learned responses back to awareness, and now you can properly starve those loops for good. Might be a little harder at that point, but that's part of the problem, part of the challenge. In the initial version of this presentation, I promised a demo of me doing this, but easier said than done. I tried many times, but whenever I manage to stay aware of my mental state, I just have no issues, because at this point I'm fairly good at doing nothing when I remember. And when I'm not aware of my mental state, all of this stuff just happens and I forget to do nothing about it. And I'll do all of the things that we know aren't going to help, just like anyone. So no demo here. I might eventually succeed in recording something useful, and if I do, I'm going to post it as a separate video. Lastly, even with a decent bit of skill doing nothing, once again, sounds stupid, sometimes it's still extremely hard to deal with learned responses. And that's when your overall mindset is a little too tangled up. For an extreme example, suppose I feel like I'm a worthless person, then I might feel like I need to play perfectly at all times to prove my worth. I might not even realize that that's what's going on mentally. So my mindset would be working against me the whole time. I'm trying to starve loops and kind of try to preserve the feelings. If you find that you just can't make this stuff happen, all is not lost though. Remember when I mentioned advanced trickery? That sort of thing, unfortunately, needs outside help. You can't do it on yourself. Basically, it's about working directly on your mindset. And since your mindset makes perfect sense to you internally, you can't really take it apart yourself. This, by the way, is part of the reason why I have the very, very occasional issue with the salt and tilting in my own streams. However, I'm happy to help you out. I've put up a page explaining what that's about and the conditions, the most important of which is that I need to be sure you're going to be taking this seriously. Just visit that page. The QR code will take you there too. And get in touch with me to actually make it happen. That's all I have for now. Please also get in touch if you have any questions or if you have feedback, want to share any experiences based on what I talked about. In the meantime, best luck with your Quake or whatever career. Professional or not, I'm not picky. So take care and I'll see you next time.